that same Steve. He's still that. But now you're also seeing another side of him that he never had to.
Interesting things, and I think about this all the time, is from the time Bernie passed till now, certainly I think society has changed. The way they digest entertainment has changed. So I think it would have been difficult. I think a lot of people would have had a hard time with some of the things.
You're telling people you work with, I don't want you even to be next to me. Like, I have such disdain for you that I am annoyed by your presence.
Steve Harvey always looked untouchable. The crisp suits, the megawatt grin, the polished one-liners that landed like clockwork. He built a brand that felt airtight. Family Feud made him the household joker. The talk shows and best-selling advice turned him into the friendly uncle of daytime TV. The viral motivational clips painted him as a blueprint for hustle and faith.
Yeah, TV talk show.
Okay, this was the one he had on NBC just recently.
Whatever, yeah. The one that damn, who took his show from him?
Kelly Clarkson.
How can Kelly Clarkson take?
Even when the world watched him slip on the biggest stage, announcing the wrong winner at Miss Universe, he didn't crumble. He came back smiling, turned the moment into a laugh, and kept it moving. That kind of bounce back isn't luck. It's someone who understands the game down to the screws. But the comedy circles he came from didn't forget the grind behind the glow. They remember open mics, bomb nights, and the unspoken rule that holds the craft together.
By the way, this is the same guy who rails against people who don't believe in his particular voodoo.
Right, against gay people.
Against gay people, against Asians.
You don't take another comic's voice. And lately, the voices from that world have been getting louder. The same rooms that cheered him on the way up started swapping the same story. An image built on polished power and a playbook that didn't always feel clean to the people who knew him before the suits. Fans saw a mentor who preached integrity. Comics saw a survivor who always landed on his feet, even if someone else took the hit.
Yo, I heard you go on the air and you said, my sister done burnt too many bridges. And there's nothing I can do for her now. Steve, do you know how hurt?
My thing with Steve Harvey is that he used my material on both his platforms.
Yeah.
After I talked to him, I saw him at Def Jam. I went up and talked to him. I said, man, you're using my material.
That's where the cracks in the image start to show. Because behind the smiles and sermon-style speeches, a very different picture keeps resurfacing. One of borrowed bits, broken trust, and friendships that turned into cautionary tales. And the first real fracture didn't come from a hater on the internet. It came from a fellow headliner with receipts and a memory that wouldn't fade. He said Steve didn't just borrow the vibe, he lifted the story straight out of his life and told it on national TV like it was his own. That's not noise, that's the kind of accusation that makes comics sit up and say, hold on, but that wasn't the whole story.
Said that about the first wife. You forget that? You told us it was her, then you went and married somebody else that think like a man. Like, what are you talking about? They think they can rewrite history.
The first name to step forward wasn't a small timer, it was Mark Curry. Yes, the same Mark from Hanging with Mr. Cooper, who said Steve didn't just skim inspiration, he crossed the line. According to Mark, a deeply personal Halloween story from his own childhood started popping up on Steve's platform, word for word, punch for punch, without so much as a nod.
That's my story. That's not his story. Steve Harvey wasn't never homeless. When Mark Curry was touring with him 25 years ago, he was making $3,000 a show in cash and doing 5 shows a week. They just tell the stories. Thanks to my wife, I'm where I am.
Mark says he confronted him about it in person after seeing it at a club set, told him straight up, you're using my material. And instead of a fix or an apology, Mark claims he got a shrug. Then the same story showed up again. Bigger stage, brighter lights. To comics, that's not a misunderstanding, that's identity theft. Your act is your fingerprint. You don't wear another man's scar like an accessory. And it wasn't just the bit itself, it was the principle. Mark painted a picture of a headliner who would watch his peers work out personal stories in small rooms.
Somebody called me and said, man, homeboy doing your material. So he did my whole Halloween run. And I know he didn't think of it. And this is true stuff that really happened to me. And so my thing is, you didn't have to do that, homeboy. Right. So, motherfucker, you made enough money, bitch.
Then later deliver those same beats to a national audience as if they were lived experiences. That's why the Halloween story stung. It wasn't a generic premise about airlines or dating. It was a memory with edges on it. The kind of story a crowd feels because it belongs to somebody. When that story changes hands without credit, audiences laugh, but the craft bleeds. Once Mark's claim started circulating, other murmurs didn't sound like isolated gripes anymore. They started to look like a pattern. Comics talk, crews talk, green rooms talk. And when the same name keeps coming up with the same accusation, people stop calling it jealousy and start calling it smoke.
Something we'll call each other because we feel for each other, because we know the real person.
Right.
Yeah. I know they lying about you online. I know that podcast is bullshit. Hang in there, dog. Don't pay no attention to that.
Yeah.
Because, and look, man, just because you can talk smooth without saying, it don't mean you ain't lying.
Right.
I be sitting up here looking at these podcasts of these other comedians that's going on talking about other comedians. Hold up, dog. Where did that shit come from? When did we become that? When did we get into tear each other down business? Because you ain't never heard me say not a disparaging remark against another comedian nowhere. You ain't heard him or him. Because we ain't cut from that cloth.
Right.
So what is your motive for doing this here? And
Mark's point wasn't just he told my joke, it was he told my life and got paid for it. In a world where originality is currency, that's a reputation hit you don't walk off with a quick punchline. But Mark wasn't the only one with a story, and the next name turned the volume all the way up. When the Kings of Comedy tour was blazing, Bernie Mac was the crowd favorite. The closer with that raw, fearless pulse you felt in your chest. On stage, he and Steve stood shoulder to shoulder like brothers. Off stage, trust didn't always match the poster. The rumor that never quite died when Bernie landed Ocean's 11, Steve allegedly moved behind the scenes pressing producers that he'd be the better fit. In any business, that's aggressive. In a brotherhood, it feels like a knife slid under the table. Bernie didn't traffic in pity. He earned love the hard way by being unmistakably himself.
We had the Steve Harvey show, so we had a national TV show. Bernie Mac was the it comedian at the time, and then DL was hot. He had a TV. But the first year we did it was just me, Bernie, and Steve.
Right.
And Steve closed.
You did the first part, and then the second part.
I think, of course, and that was, definitely a contributor.
That's why the story hit nerve. It wasn't just Hollywood jockeying. It sounded like a friend stepping into your lane the second you caught a break. Even years later, when clips and recollections resurfaced, fans noticed how differently the two men carried their crowns. Bernie was the people's king, unpolished, honest, magnetic. Steve became the media king, tailored, meticulous, always camera ready. One won the room, the other owned the room. The tension never got its ending. Bernie passed in 2008, and whatever needed to be said stayed trapped between green room walls and unreturned calls. But the legacy didn't forget. Every time that Ocean story pops back up, it reopens an old question about the way success is chased and protected. If the allegation was true, it wasn't just a grab at a role, it was a message about how far someone might go to stay ahead. That's the thread running through these whispers. Not one act, but a pattern. Jokes that sound familiar, moves that feel strategic, a smile that always lands while someone else loses the spotlight. And if Bernie's chapter hinted at quiet power plays, the next critic didn't do quiet at all. He grabbed the mic and lit the room on fire. Because when Katt Williams spoke on Steve, he didn't leave anything between the lines. Katt Williams didn't tiptoe. He stomped on the line and dared anyone to move him. He called Steve the king of taking other people's work, joked that Hollywood had finally found room for a country slickster with a Mr. Potato Head grin, and then went past jokes into motive. Katt's point wasn't just that Steve borrowed, it was that he built a brand on other people's edges while selling the world a sermon about hustle and grace. He connected dots most fans never looked at, how the Steve Harvey show felt like it wore the same jacket as Hanging with Mr. Cooper, how Mark Curry's fingerprints seemed to show up on Steve's sets, how a mentor persona kept the spotlight neat while the green room stories got messy. Under Katt's mic, the narrative shifted. It stopped being "is Steve funny?" and started being "is this the kind of funny you can only get by cutting pieces off other people?" Katt's delivery was pure gasoline, barbed one-liners, surgical timing, but he also pushed a bigger idea: that image is its own weapon. If you wrap your ambition in God talk and clean suits, the industry will hand you a halo and call it wholesome, even if the people who knew you before the gloss start saying the shine came at their expense. That's why Katt's rant stuck. They didn't float as petty shade, they hit like someone yanking the backdrop to show the scaffolding. Audiences saw a star who could take a public L like the Miss Universe fiasco and still leave with the crowd in his pocket. Comics saw something else, a survivor who never stopped calculating the angles, and every time Katt revisited the topic, he didn't soften. He kept the pressure on the same pressure point Mark Curry pressed. Originality. Your act is your life. Steal the act and you steal the life that birthed it. But the most complicated chapter wasn't a roast, it was a conversation that split a community right down the middle. Because when Nique stood on principle and Steve answered with pragmatism, the masks came off and the industry took notes. When Nique said she was being frozen out after Precious for refusing to play by backroom rules, she wasn't whispering, she was planting a flag. She expected pushback from studios, not from a peer who preached faith, loyalty, and standing tall. But on national national TV, Steve told her flat out this isn't the integrity game, it's the money game. In one sentence, the mentor mask slipped and the mogul stepped forward. You could see the shock wash over her face. Not because they disagreed, but because he made it sound simple. Choose the check, let the principal wait. To audiences who'd been sold the gospel of character, that moment didn't feel like advice, it felt like a confession. Fans replayed the clip frame by frame. Monique stood on what she believed, even if it cost her booking. Steve protected the seat he'd fought to keep, even if it meant telling a sister in the craft to bend. And right there, the divide sharpened. The public saw a polished negotiator explaining how the world really works. Comics heard a veteran confirm what the green rooms had been saying. Survival first, image second, everything else later. If the Mark Curry and Katt Williams chapters sounded like allegations about material, this one sounded like a thesis on power, how to keep it, how to defend it, and what you're willing to sacrifice so it never slips. That's why the clip wouldn't die. It lived on as a reference point, a Rosetta Stone for understanding the difference between the man on stage and the manager behind the curtain. And it set up the quiet chorus from people who'd known him longest. They didn't call him fake, they called him adaptable, the kind of adaptable that can read any room and walk out on top. But that wasn't the whole story. D.L. Hughley didn't jump out with fireworks. He slipped a sentence into a conversation and let it echo. Steve knows how to survive in every room. It sounded like a compliment until you sat with it. Survive how? By reading the air, by mirroring whoever holds the power, by changing cadence, code, and conviction depending on the crowd. That's not illegal. It's not even rare. But in comedy, where your voice is supposed to be the one thing that never bends, it raises question. If your survival depends on switching skins, what happens to the people who built you before the switch? That's where the whispers from old crews sting. Folks from the radio days said the off-camera Steve didn't feel like the on-camera uncle. The public got the pastor tone and the punchlines. Staff got the boss sharp, exact, and cold when he needed to be. Not a mentor, a manager, not a team, an engine. The line that stuck in back rooms wasn't crafted for TV. Steve doesn't keep friends, he keeps opportunities. It's harsh and it lands because it explains the puzzle, how a man could be everywhere at once, smiling through storms that would drown other people. To be fair, that's how a lot of careers are built in Hollywood. Adapt or disappear. Shake hands, protect your image, never bleed in public. Steve just did it better than most. He mastered the pivot. He learned to turn bad headlines into monologues and monologues into booking fees. Even DL's observation felt like a nod to that craft. The survival code is a skill, but it's also a cost. If every room gets a different version of you, the people who knew you first will eventually ask which version is real. And when enough rooms start comparing notes, the shine loses its mystery. The Curry accusation looks less like an outlier. The Bernie story feels less like gossip. The Monique moment stops being a debate and starts reading like a mission statement. Image first, position first, survival always. Still, there's a reason the empire never cracked. It wasn't just charm. It was control over narrative, over tempo, over how the world processed his missteps. He didn't just survive rooms, he learned how to run them. But that wasn't the whole story. Here's what separates Steve from almost everyone else. The man can take a headline that would wreck careers and turn it into a reroute. The Miss Universe slip should have been a career ender. The kind of live TV melt that follows you into every interview forever. Instead, he reappeared with a grin, owned the blunder, flipped it into a running joke, and walked back on the same stage like nothing could stick. That wasn't luck, that was control. He understood that if you get in front of the story fast enough and sell it with certainty, audiences don't just forgive you, they root for you. And once the crowd decides you're human in the best way, the machine decides you're bankable in any weather. But that public charm sits next to a different portrait from the people who work the gears. Former radio and show staff describe a boss who ran things tight, precise, demanding, and unforgiving if you missed your mark. Not a warm mentor, a results operator. The smile was for the lens, the standard was for the room. Folks said you learned to measure your words because one wrong sentence could get you replaced without a ripple. That doesn't break any rules in show business, it's practically a playbook, but it does widen the gap between the image on billboards and the echo in the hallways. To fans, he's the uncle who knows the right word at the right time. To crews, he's the executive who keeps the train on time, even if someone has to get left at the station. That's why accusations and tensions never seemed to land a knockout. The narrative was locked. Family man, faith talk, tailored suits, and quotable wisdom. When the Curry claims resurfaced, when the Bernie whispers circulated, when Katt torched him with a flamethrower and Monique held the line on principle, the brand didn't buckle. It absorbed the shock. He'd step out with another viral clip, another clean laugh, another polished message about discipline and grind. Every stumble turned into a segment. Every segment turned into bookings, and the cycle kept paying. Power works like that in this business. If you can command the room will protect you. If you can reset the frame, the camera will meet you where you stand. Steve figured that out early and never let it go. He didn't just survive the storm, he learned to sell umbrellas on the way out. But storms don't disappear, they circle. And when enough voices keep pointing to the same cracks, the lifted bits, the quiet backdoor moves, the money game mantra, the shine starts to look like armor. Armor is impressive. It's also a sign you've been taking hits. And that's where this story turns from biography to verdict. Because the final question question isn't whether he fell, it's whether the reckoning ever arrives for someone who built a career on always landing upright. But that wasn't the whole story. So we circle back to the image, the clean suits, the tidy punchlines, the don't blink smile that glides past chaos like it's part of the act. And then we line it up with the voices that refuse to fade. Mark Curry with the Halloween story that wasn't just a bit, it was a memory. Bernie Mac's legacy wrapped in an ocean-sized rumor that never stopped echoing. Katt Williams dragging the curtain and pointing straight at the scaffolding. Nique standing still while the money game tried to push her off principle. One by one, those moments don't look like noise, they look like a chorus. Clips resurface. Old interviews get a second life. Fans who once laughed without blinking start replaying the footage with the sound off, watching body language, clocking the timing, hearing what wasn't said, and in that silence, a pattern takes shape. Not courtroom proof, but culture memory. The kind that doesn't need a judge because the audience is the jury, and the verdict is how the story gets told the next time your name comes up. What makes this so sticky is that Steve didn't just succeed, he adapted. He shape-shifted from club comic to sitcom lead, from radio ringleader to daytime captain, from uncle who cracks a joke to mentor who hands out a mantra. Reinvention can be noble, it can also be a mask. And when reinvention leaves behind people who say that was mine, that was our bond, or that was the moment you chose the seat over the friend, the glow starts to feel like it runs on other people's battery. Still, he never fell. That's the paradox. Every time the narrative should have buckled, the live TV blunder, the backlash overtakes on women in relationships, the green room rumors, it didn't. He reset the frame, moved the spotlight, and kept going. That's not accident, that's a skill set. Call it resilience, call it power, call it the ultimate read the room reflex. Whatever you name it, it's how he turns stumbles into segments and segments into more microphone. But resilience can turn into armor, and armor tells its own story. It means you've been hit. It also means you're expecting more hits. When enough comics, colleagues, and crew retell the same kind of moment material that felt lifted, opportunities that felt undercut, a philosophy that says integrity is optional when the bag is on the table, the audience starts asking a harder question than is he funny? They ask, what did it cost? Because comedy isn't just about punchline. It's ownership. It's trust. It's the right to say this happened to me and know the person next to you won't wear your scar like a costume. That's why the Curry story still stings. That's why Bernie's shadow still stretches across the room. That's why Katt's fire never cools and Monique's clip still circulates like a truth people refuse to misplace. These aren't tabloid sparks, they're road flares. And yet nobody can knock the grind. Steve outworked insomnia. He built multiple lanes and kept them all moving. He turned motivational beats into a business and turned that business into a brand. But a brand isn't a soul. And when the brand shines brighter than the bond, the people who knew you before the billboard will say it out loud. So where does that leave us? With a question that doesn't fit on a meme. Did Steve Harvey earn the crown, or did he borrow it piece by piece from the people who couldn't afford to fight the machine? Maybe both can be true, that he's talented and tactical, driven and divisive, inspiring and to some unforgivable. That's the split screen legacy, and it's why this story won't stop moving. Because reckonings don't always crash in one day. Sometimes they arrive as a slow reveal. Old clips, new context, familiar faces finally getting heard. The spotlight made him a legend. The echoes from the trenches are testing the legend's weight. And if there's one thing show business never fails to do, it's balance books eventually. So you tell it. Did he climb clean, or did he climb clever? Did the money game save a career or sell off a code? Drop your take below, because this chapter isn't the credits, it's the setup. The next voice to speak might change the whole picture again. Make sure you're here when it does. Like, subscribe, and share if you want the full breakdowns as they surface. Because the laughter that built this empire is fading into questions, and the answers are starting to sound louder than the applause.